Welcome to the Child Observation and Assessment Preparing for Assessment Content Talk. Today we're going to really think about preparation and just how important it is that as teachers we are skilled at organization and collection of the observation and assessment data that's really going to help us understand that comprehensive development of the child. So we really need to prepare for this ongoing child observation. We need to think of ways to get organized, and then we need to understand the various assessment strategies once we have all of that data. So in this content talk, the first component that we want to focus on is really that preparation. It's very important as we walk into that role of teaching that we understand that the cyclical relationship between curriculum and instruction and assessment is really driven by that understanding of children's learning and development. Periodic ongoing assessment of children's learning and development helps teachers to identify children's strengths and the skills that they are developing. Each snapshot we have of a child really helps us understand the gradual process and progress that children are making. This ongoing monitoring of children's development, really helps us to move children forward within activities, within the daily schedule, and it also gives us an opportunity to have important information to share with families. When we think about guiding curriculum planning, the knowledge that children and teachers can gain through assessment is applied in our curriculum planning. The types of experiences that we can provide, the next steps for how we differentiate for the individual children, whether it's a new unit of study or whether it's ongoing curriculum. It can help us understand how to modify the materials or the setting or the instruction and the scaffolding that we're going to provide. Then lastly, we think about screening children for potential referrals. We really want to keep those diagnostic screenings separate from ongoing assessment. So when we talk about things like the dial or the pergants, those are screeners that are used maybe once or twice to identify some areas that children may be struggling in. And then for those screenings, we can think about assessment activities and putting children in the context of learning to see, does that screening information really hold to what I'm seeing in the classroom? So we'll go through that topic a little more in depth as we go through this talk. So before we begin with more information, let's stop and think. How do teachers make plans to collect information about all of the children in all areas of development in order to inform their teaching? Take a minute to think about some of the readings that you've already experienced in this course. You may also be a teacher currently, and so you know of specific strategies that you're trying out, maybe some that have worked really well for you, maybe some that you're refining. I know when I talk with teachers, having note cards and sticky notes and trying to manage all of them can sometimes be overwhelming. But when we gather information through systematic approaches that are well organized, we're able to understand what information we have, and then we're also able to see the gaps. What more information do I need to collect from children? So now let's think about preparation. A full range of assessment procedures should include a variety of information gathering strategies. So we really want to think about varied assessments. It's important to think we're collecting assessments in many ways. So for example, we could use teacher checklists, we could use rubrics, we can use audio and transcribe language samples of children and analyze those. We can collect work samples and photos. All of that would be varied approaches. But we want to think about much of the information that we desire to be gathered for all children, but there may be plans for follow-up on individual children, particularly the ones that we are monitoring for that individual growth. or that we want to recheck and assess those individual children in particular areas with ongoing information. That's very important. So you might think about the experiences that you've had personally in doing this, or if you're a student who's observing in a classroom setting, you might notice how teachers are creating this system to gather and follow up with individual children. Some information is gathered through formal means. So some of the means that I talked about a moment ago, such as checklists or observing and creating anecdotal notes and collecting work samples, those are more formative assessments that should be ongoing. More formal means that there's a structure for how the assessor will be approaching children, which items are presented, and how they're presented to the children. Other times the format is more informal. A teacher may jot down those anecdotal records, may view something, you might decide, oh, I need to go grab my camera. I've got to get this captured. Those would again be those informal or formative components. Preparation also includes some attention to some other types of activities. Information is gathered on a schedule. So we want to think about, for example, the assessment framework that the school uses. Maybe it's DRDP, maybe it's Head Start Learning Outcomes Framework. Whichever assessment framework is used, there should be some sort of guide that indicates these are the standards, these are the skills that we're looking for, and that timetable is important. Teachers might also set schedules for taking anecdotal notes or using checklists. So you may use a tool to organize. On this day of the week, I'm going to be looking for this. I'm going to be using this. Or for this day, I'm going to be just looking at these 5 children. So having a schedule and using a pre-planned schedule can help you ensure you're collecting information from all of the children and that you're collecting the information from all of the domains. So it's important to think about that comprehensive approach even within our planning system. Next, we're going to take a look at this video where we're going to be thinking about how and when to assess. So you're going to see a discussion about that.
Kids, like one of the things I noticed, I plan for observing and assessing children. It's really embedded into my lesson plans. In the summer, there's a lot of critical thought when I'm forward thinking. How are we going to get all of the domains covered so that children, we're covering all of the preschool learning foundations for language and for math, and what are all the motor skills. So I do a lot of forward planning in mapping those out. And it's something that's fluid. It obviously changes throughout the year as you see what children are interested in, as you see what children's skill levels are. We have clipboards in our classroom where we can take open-ended notes for the things that we're seeing. And then in small groups or during specific activities where the children don't know that they're being assessed per se on anything, but we might be looking at 3 or 4 or up to 7 different aspects of assessment, and it really does combine nicely together. Many times when we're doing an activity, I'm looking at a language piece, and I'm looking at a motor piece, and I'm looking at an academic piece, which may be a math concept or some other concept.
We've learned so far. Together, fish.
I definitely use the observations when I see that we still need a lot of phonological awareness and alphabet knowledge. I will tie that into the unit that we're discussing for the week. So this week is oceans. I have games that we're going to be doing and activities as far as phonological awareness, clapping out sounds of ocean animals, and we'll also be doing some rhyming. I'll have some rhyming books, 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish, and they'll be able to identify the same sounds. And we're also going to be doing alphabet knowledge. We have also another fishing activity where they're going to fish for letters. So that way I can see, and they get to name the letters when they pull it out. Oh, A, I just fished for an A. Oh, I fished for a C. So that way they're identifying that. When I'm doing the Pictionary words, that would be a good time for you to get that print awareness too, because they're recognizing those letters and they're recognizing different words that I'm talking about in the pictures.
The jellyfish are
For individualization, you're able to see where the children are and what they still need to work on. And from the individualization, you can also tie it into the home visits and the conferences, and you can work on those as goals with the parents. So your work at home is paying off too. She's really come along.
I'm on the same page. We meet once a week. We talk about what goals that were worked on for the previous week, what worked, what didn't work, what new strategies we want to try. And if that particular goal that we were working on with that child worked, we move on with the next goal. The majority of the time it's the morning, and we'll discuss what happened the previous day, what worked, what didn't work, what activities we're going to put out for that specific day. If anything changed, what child she's going to be working with that day, what child I'm going to be targeting that day, if she's going to do the camera or the notebook, and we'll take turns with that.
Ready to draw their ocean picture? And
We just do notes, observations, that kind of thing. We're fortunate because we have a computer program where we can enter the observations, and it does all these tallies for us so we can see how many observations in all the areas that we have. So we try to observe with social emotional, we try to observe math, social studies, arts, language arts, and so we kind of go back the next day and then we're intentional about watching that child and writing down some things that they're doing and observing. I think it's real easy. If you don't have some kind of system of making sure you're getting everybody, it's easy to overlook somebody. And you'd think, oh, I'm a teacher, I'd never overlook, I know what they're doing, but if you don't have some kind of checklist. So we have the computer checklist, and then we also have, it's just a simple chart, it's got all their names on it, and we just check off when we do observations for them, so that we can make sure that we're hitting everybody. And then as a team, when we do our lesson plans, we kind of sit through and go through what we've seen, what the kids are interested in. Even though I think that I know what they're doing, sometimes they surprise me. And so I think it's really important to have a system where you actually are making sure you are seeing every child and you are giving every child an opportunity to show you what they can do.
It's about balancing. It's like you got to balance time with the kids, you got to balance time with the paperwork, balance time with the parents, balance time with administration, balance time with the computer, and so it's like a continual juggling act. But once you get a flow of it, there's a way that it can be a happy equilibrium.
They develop a system that works for each individual classroom, teacher, or team, so that they're able to collect the necessary observations and then proceed taking anecdotal observations. So there's so much happening throughout the day that teachers feel comfortable, first of all, in developing some sort of time during the day, making the time to collect the observations. When you're interacting with them, engaging with them, you're able to write down what you see. So it's important to have that system of anecdotal observation continuously. And then if you want to divide, depending on your class size and how many in your team, who's going to do what, so that by the end of the week you're able to look back and see, wow, we've gotten so many observations, we're able to plan accordingly. So we see the children moving along in the continuum.
All right, so from this, we saw a lot of comprehensive approaches to ongoing assessment taking place in these classrooms. Hopefully you heard also the planning decisions that are being made on how to assess and when to assess. So I particularly was interested to see how the different approaches were. Some teachers were capturing it right in their daily activities that they're already planning, and then they're going back and responding with some intentional teaching, and then they're using the activities as sources of information and even planning with their co-teacher or their assistant teacher, okay, could you look for this while I'm looking for this? And so that is really important when you're working as a team time and you're organized and you have a focus. This helps all of those overwhelming feelings that can creep up about time, as mentioned by one teacher, because as she said, you just really get into the flow of it. So as we move on, we're going to be thinking about more further by thinking about these two teachers as a case study. So as we plan for assessment, we want to think about how we might have some concerns about the information we're going to gather, and then how we are going to actually address and get that assessment information. So I want you to think about these two teachers as a working group. Crystal, the teacher, is for a class of 20 children, and Ellen, her assistant, are planning together. As they go over the lesson plans for the coming week, they talk about how things are going in the classroom. They think about the children in the classroom and how these activities are going to respond to the children's interests and what they currently are working on. And then they think about most of the children are making good progress, but there may be some children that they are concerned need a little more attention on some specific areas. They believe they really ought to be checking the children's progress, and they need to do that ASAP. So Crystal and Ellen then become concerned that they might not have enough time to gather all the information that they need to inform their teaching and communicate effectively with families. So we just need to hold on and think about that information because they are having the concern of how are we going to get this done. So it's great that they have a plan because now they can have targeted action. Let's see what happens when we talk. So now we want to think about a comprehensive planning for child observation and assessment. First, let's think about preparing for ongoing assessment. Teaching never stops. We don't want learning to stop, and assessment is right a part of that. So what to assess should be the first thing that we think about. Go back to what you know about child development and those developmental domains. Whatever program you're in, there will be an assessment framework that will guide the areas that you will assess. If it's the desired results developmental profile, which is the DRDP, if it's the Head Start Outcomes Early Learning Framework, maybe it's Teaching Strategies Gold or the Work Sampling System, whatever, you will be able to find those areas that are the goals of the curriculum program. Normally these are organized in developmental domains such as cognition and general knowledge, which could be logical and mathematical reasoning, scientific reasoning and exploration, language development and literacy knowledge, approaches to learning, social and emotional development, expression and fine arts and creative activities and development, physical development, and health. These are the typical areas of development. So how will you assess? We already have some examples from the video and from earlier slides that have helped us think about how we will assess. Teachers must consider strategies for gathering information. So that what works well in a checklist, what might need to be observed and recorded with anecdotal notes and some videos, what may need to be elicited through some games and activities. Always remembering that if it can happen within the context of children's play, you will get the best results instead of on the side pull out drilling activities. Teachers can also consider organizational strategies here. How will the information be recorded? How is it going to be transferred, charted, entered into a computer system, stored? Teachers must also consider how their responses to this how question will be responsive to cultural and linguistic diversity. These are important things. So then the next piece is when to assess. When is the best time to gather assessment information? Teachers should be encouraged all the time to embed assessment into ongoing activities. Just like when we think about Crystal and Ellen who are planning, or the teachers in our video earlier, as they're planning activities, they're connecting their assessments to what they need to gather right together. That is integrated instruction and integrated assessment. Children's persistence and social relationship skills may be assessed at any time as they play in learning centers, as they're working together collaboratively in small groups, during outdoor play, during mealtime. And then we can think about other things like snacks and meals for fine motor skills, for understanding children's mathematical knowledge, for understanding their oral language use and their literacy skills. Any part of the preschool day or the kindergarten day can be used to gather this kind of information. Finally, who will assess? With everyone on the teaching team contributing, assessment can be more efficient. The roles and responsibilities should be clear, and the lead teacher often takes the responsibility of mapping that out, yet working collaboratively with the team. Everyone should be having the resources to be successful. Team members need basic materials like pencils, paper, maybe it's a notebook, maybe it's a clipboard. We also need to think about those child development references. You have to have a basic knowledge in child development to know what you're looking for. Access and copying to printing materials and equipment is helpful, and then some sort of storage. I've stored everything from used pizza boxes to shoe boxes to storing in different kinds of folders I had, and then I went to 3-ring binders for students, and then that merged into portfolios. And so coming up with that system is important, but just remembering that the information and the child's skills should be gathered in a way that you can share those with families. All right, let's talk more about what to assess. So as we think about this planning, we want our teaching team to think about what to assess in relation to that assessment framework, whether it's Head Start Early Learning Outcomes Framework, whether it's your DRDP, whether it's the Missouri Early Learning Standards. All of their programs, curriculum, and assessment instruments need to be put in as one target. Those are those universal learning targets. Then we think about teachers usually then begin with a general plan for assessment, and they're assessing the whole class. Typically for the entire year, this is ongoing, but right at the beginning, we really think about how we capture the whole class. We really get to know the children in depthly, and then we know who we need to focus on more intently as we go. Then we think about, and that's those specific targets, and then we think about the specific goals or skills. Through ongoing child assessment, it will become clear which children need a little bit more of our attention, our attunement, our extra support in different curricula areas. And that's why it's important to focus on curricula areas so that we're not labeling children as low or high generally, because we need to think about where are their strengths so we can build learning experiences appropriately that will then enable us to enrich the assessment data. For children who have individual education plans or a behavior support plan, teaching teams will be collecting data about the progress along those goals as well, and that's important to keep in mind. Again, this is an example of the Head Start Early Learning Outcomes Framework, which is very similar to DRDP. You can see that there are central domains, and then each one of those domains is then operationalized further. This is an example of what we might make sure we have with us as we're recording. The more experience you have as a teacher, the less that you're having to have this document right with you as you're assessing, but it does help make sure that you're checking off everything in detail as you're moving through the learning goals that are expected. So now let's think about how to assess. Once you've reviewed the Head Start Outcomes Framework that you're using for this course, or perhaps the DRDP, then you can have a sense of what teachers are going to be reviewing as they think about the program's curriculum and the assessment tools. And then you're ready. You're ready to get organized and be ready to assess. Many teaching teams use charts or computer programs to make sure that they're remembering to collect all the progress information that they've planned to do. And this ensures that each child is represented well across each domain. You never want to be at the time where it's conferences or you're having a celebration of learning and you realize, I don't have very much for these two children. That's really the worst feeling a teacher can have. And so by being very proactive and making this a part of your regular practice, you can avoid those situations. The information that is collected, you want to think about how it's going to be stored and organized by your team members. If you use computer files, it's very easy. And in fact, many tablets or even your phone can have an application on it to scan work samples, to scan documents, to upload videos. You know, Google Drive is really an awesome place that can be a shared drive that is still protected and can hold those information on different children. And then you can also share that with families. Several new programs such as Learning Genie is available, which is an application that combines parent access with teacher access. So parents are seeing in real time the assessment progress of their children. And that's another real benefit for how you can utilize technology and your team to build these resources. Some other things that you might want to consider when you're making weekly assessment plans: how will the teaching team collect progress information during upcoming activities this week? Or how will you collect data about the children that you're focusing on across this particular domain? Will you instead gather information on about a small group during the given week? Or does your teaching team have another way? When I was in the classroom and I was teaching kindergarten and pre-K, I often used some resources from Project Construct to where I would look at specific children across the different daily schedule. Usually those might be the children who are having some behavior challenges because I was really wanting to isolate. Is there a reason? Is there a part of the day that's really hard for them? Is it because they're hungry? Is this happening when they're with particular children? So that was one approach. Another approach is I would look across different children across different areas. So for example, on Monday, I might look at 5 specific children during center time, and then the next day I would look at 5 specific children. That way, by the end of the week, during that center time, I was able to capture the whole class. Those are just 2 small examples of how you can create a varied approach for noticing not only the settings and what children are gaining in their learning from the different activities, but also how you can look at the academic things happening, but then also the social and emotional pieces that are happening in the classroom. So when we get organized, we might create some sort of schedule. The table here shows how you might approach this, and it's kind of like what I just... All right, so in getting organized, this table below really shows an example of what I just mentioned on the previous slide when we were thinking about how to get organized. Typically, if you can create some daily assessment areas that you're going to really be looking at, that helps ensure that you capture all of the information that you need to. So here you can say, we have this day of the week that we're really going to focus in on using language to express needs. You know, we may have picked this particular area because we've noticed we don't have enough language samples to really be able to see how children are using their language. Have they moved from more requests to more expression of ideas or building on each other's responses? Are they asking questions to teachers and peers? So we might organize a checklist to be able to capture this individually by children, but we're also going to capture some language samples intentionally so that we can see how children are expressing their needs. And this is just one example of how we might put something together to organize our work. When we think about assessment strategies, we're going to build on some of the things that we've mentioned. There's many different techniques that teachers can use to incorporate ongoing assessment into their classrooms. First, if you are assessing children's progress in curriculum content areas where descriptive information would be helpful, plan to collect anecdotal notes, right? Because that's going to give you the most contextually rich information, especially of what children are doing or saying and teacher behaviors within that context. If the area that you are assessing best results in collecting some work samples, then you might want to think about drawings, representational constructions, maybe a sample or a photo of the children's work. You can always take a photo and scan that in as a work example. Finally, if you need information about how children engage in interactive physical or problem-solving activities, you might record a video. Videos are really useful for a wide variety of assessments, and it really helps the team members share rich information about children with families. We'll talk more about these strategies in future content talks. All right, so now we're ready to think about important determinants for the how. Some program goals state easily what the observed behaviors are going to be, such as recognize and labels emotions, while others are not so specific. Recognize how actions affect others and accepts consequences of one's own action. In a later case, it can help teachers to kind of talk out what they expect that they're going to see, what children might actually do to represent this. That way, everyone has a clear understanding of what it is that they're documenting. This really helps with reliable outcomes. Teachers should consider where the classroom context really serves as the best places for observing children's behavior. Consider questions of how much to document and when to document. So when we think about when we're working with our team, how they might be asking, gosh, are we really capturing everything we need, or are we documenting too much? You will know as you are able to map the information on. Remember, any indicator that you are going to rate a child on, you want to have a variety of observations or information that you can connect to that. So the question really is, you have to look comprehensively and make sure that you're capturing things in a reliable, consistent way. As children learn, it takes time for them to become fluent in something new, and even more time for them to be able to take what they've learned and apply it into a new context, or maybe even a new or slightly different situation. So teachers should really consider how to ensure that, they don't make an overly quick assumption that a child has mastered something and that can just be checked off. Especially with young development, as pruning happens, we have progress and regress. So, children can really demonstrate one day that we think, oh wow, they've really got this, and then a couple of weeks go by and we're thinking, oh, they're just not doing this again. That's an indication of they're still learning and growing. And so we want to gather information in multiple contexts and continue to work to develop children's wide range of abilities across many different time periods and many different activities. Embedding assessment in these multiple contexts is one step towards assuring that what's being assessed is worthwhile and authentic. When children show what they know or what they can do in everyday activities, the process is meaningful to them, and it lets teachers know that children are really using their knowledge and skills effectively. The previous points, maximizing authenticity and looking at multiple contexts, really helps the third point here, which is addressing cultural and linguistic diversity. Teachers need to be aware of how children might demonstrate what they know in different ways, and particularly in their cultural group. For example, responding to test-like questions is an experience that varies among children. So if you're drilling children and they're feeling like they're being questioned, they may shy away and not feel confident in answering. Doesn't mean they don't know, but it just isn't the process that works best for them. So being aware of how children's behavior is influenced by their background is key to understanding how they will respond and become active in an assessment. It's also important to be able to assess the cultural sensitivity of any measure using to gather information. So that's particularly important when we look at standardized assessments. Some standardized assessments use pictures, for example, and children with different backgrounds may not have background knowledge in the vocabulary or in the interpretation of the picture being depicted in a vocabulary card, for example. Children that grow up in the city, maybe they grow up in an apartment or a complex versus a house that looks like a square with a roof on top, may not have the same vocabulary and interpretation of the pictures in those assessments. So that's important. The last thing for children who are dual language learners, that how questions should include a consideration of how to assess the children in both English and their home language. This expectation can impact the results. It can impact other questions in the preparation phase. And so this, again, is another key component to remember. So when to assess.
Squiggling through the water.
They develop a system that works for each individual classroom, teacher, or team, so that they're able to collect the necessary observations and then proceed taking anecdotal observations. So there's so much happening throughout the day that teachers feel comfortable, first of all, in developing some sort of time during the day, making the time to collect the observations. When you're interacting with them, engaging with them, you're able to write down what you see. So it's important to have that system of anecdotal observation continuously. And then if you want to divide, depending on your class size and how many in your team, who's going to do what, so that by the end of the week you're able to look back and see, wow, we've gotten so many observations. We're able to plan accordingly. So we see the children moving along in the continuum.
Yeah, that ocean water has salt in it. It's salt water.
Good job.
So in review, here's some important things to consider. We want to summarize this planning process, right, and getting organized. So you want to look at your curriculum goals, your assessment tools, and that helps you determine the areas of development and learning that you're going to focus on your assessment. You know, all of these areas are continually assessed, but at given points in time, we have to plan for those. Then we decide how to keep these things organized. You know, what's our system going to be for collecting information about the children, storing it in a way that it's easy to use by ourselves and the team. When planning how to assess children's progress, we want to think about the curriculum content areas, select effective strategies for collecting that information. So the strategy needs to match what it is we're looking for. Is it a checklist going to serve us best? Is it a rubric? Pay attention to being sensitive to the cultural and linguistic diversity of children and the background experiences as well. Then we plan to gather ongoing child assessment information at convenient times throughout the daily schedule when particular skills are going to be enhanced and portrayed in ongoing classroom activities. To most efficiently gather assessment information, plan who's going to collect that in teaching teams may also be very important. So in conclusion, with this particular content talk, we really reviewed how to prepare for child observation and assessment, how to prepare for comprehensive ongoing assessment, how to get organized and plan, and how to use various strategies for making sure we are collecting everything across all the learning domains on all of our children.